It was unscheduled and unscripted. The press had to scramble to get these shots. Just after 6 p.m. on May 29, 1988, President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy emerged from their limousine in the historic Arbat section of Moscow. Word that the American president had come out to meet them, unannounced, instantly spread, and thousands of Russians surged onto the streets. Despite a growing worry things could spiral out of control, the 77-year-old Reagan actually climbed onto a vegetable cart to address the crowd. Reagan's press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater, thought this is either going to be a disaster or be the greatest performance in history. Hello, I'm Bret Baier. What that scene in the Arbat turned out to be was the dramatic opening act in a clash of images, words, and ideas that signaled to the world that the Cold War was all but won. I write about it in my new book, 3 Days in Moscow, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of the Soviet Empire. It's an epic story with an unlikely hero, or so it once seemed. Hard to believe, but as a young man, the greatest of Cold Warriors was so left-wing the FBI suspected he was a communist. In 1946, communists in the Screen Actors Guild threatened to end Reagan's acting career by pouring acid on his face. Repulsed by such totalitarian tactics, Reagan began to take notice of communist expansion overseas.
We in America have met some years ago a similar program called Prussianism under the Kaiser. We met it more recently called Nazism under Hitler. We're meeting it again now under the name of communism, and it is national expansion on the part of Russia.
For the next 40 years, he was relentless.
How we meet the communist challenge depends on you.
No critic of communism was more forceful, more uncompromising than Reagan.
We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters.
In the 70s, he opposed the Nixon, Ford, Kissinger policy of détente.
My view of the policy of détente as pursued by the administration is one of making concessions to the Soviets. We give them something they want very badly. We don't ask anything in return.
Neither the summits nor arms control treaties stopped the spread of communism as America looked to be slowly losing the Cold War. After his loss to Gerald Ford in 1976, Reagan spoke movingly about the stakes. Not simply the future of civilization, the survival of civilization.
Someone asked me to write a letter for a time capsule that is going to be opened in Los Angeles 100 years from now. I thought to myself, we live in a world in which the great powers have aimed at each other horrible missiles of destruction that can in a matter of minutes arrive in each other's country and destroy. Those who would read this letter 100 years from now will know whether those missiles were fired. They will know whether we met our challenge.
Ford himself lost to Jimmy Carter, while the Soviets added satellite states in Asia, Africa, and South America. When Reagan ran again in 1980, his anti-communism seemed to many out of step with the times. But he won in a landslide, using his first press conference as president to again denounce communism.
Mr. President, what do you see as the long-range intentions of the Soviet Union?
I know of no leader of the Soviet Union that has not more than once repeated their determination that their goal must be the promotion of world revolution and a one-world socialist or communist state.
Mr. President! An assassination attempt intensified his zeal, not merely to fight the Cold War, but to win it. He and Pope John Paul II, who also miraculously survived an assassin's bullet just 6 weeks after Reagan, agreed that God spared them so they could end communism and collapse the Soviet Union.
The West won't contain communism. It'll transcend communism.
When I came in 1982, Reagan was still in full-throated denunciation of the Soviet Union. He was still very much playing the Cold Warrior.
What I'm describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term. The march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history.
Few, even among his allies, shared his belief that the Cold War was winnable.
There was a huge argument within the administration. People in the Defense Department and the CIA both thought the Soviet Union was there, that was Détente. We're here, they're there, that's life. Get along.
The American public seemed to agree. Nearly three-quarters favored a nuclear freeze by the United States and Soviet Union.
I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all.
That sparked Reagan's most forceful criticism ever of the Soviet Union.
To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
I was at the speech where he talked about the evil empire and the focus of evil in the modern world. It was stunning. Even by Reagan standards, that was pretty blunt and pretty raw.
I remember just asking myself and my staff, saying, you know, what did Reagan have in mind when he called them the evil empire, which is really a pretty brazen statement for a president to make about another country. And we just decided that he really felt he could make things better.
Ronald Reagan wanted to win the Cold War from the beginning of his time in office until the end.
You once called him a principled pragmatist, whose strongest suit, you said, was knowing what he believed and why he believed it.
He had a system of going about things. Number one, be realistic. Number two, be strong. Not just military strength, economic strength, but then more than that, have strength of purpose. Number three, figure out what it is that you want. Then when you got all that straight, sit down and negotiate. Then you get a hand to play.
But before Reagan was ready to play that hand, he dramatically upped the ante.